People often believe the person who walks away smiling is the one who wins. That was exactly what everyone inside the Fulton County Courthouse believed the morning my marriage officially ended. They watched my husband, Logan Whitmore, shake hands with his attorney, as though he had just closed the most profitable business deal of his life. His mother, Margaret Whitmore, sat beside him with a smile so satisfied it almost looked rehearsed. To them, the divorce wasn't a tragedy. It was a celebration. It was the day they believed they had finally removed the woman they had spent years convincing themselves never truly belonged in their family. I sat quietly across the table, listening to every insult without interrupting a single time. The leather chair beneath me felt colder than I expected, but after 10 years of marriage, I had learned that silence often carried far more power than anger. The courtroom itself was almost empty except for our attorneys, the judge, and a few people waiting for their own hearings. Yet somehow, it still felt crowded by memories. I could still remember standing beside Logan on our wedding day, believing we would grow old together. Back then, he used to reach for my hand whenever life became difficult. Somewhere along the way, ambition replaced gratitude, pride replaced kindness, and the man I married slowly disappeared behind a version of himself that cared more about appearances than loyalty. Mrs. Brooks, the judge said calmly, sliding the final packet of documents toward me. Once these papers are signed, your marriage will be legally dissolved. Do you understand the terms? Yes, Your Honor, I answered without hesitation. Logan leaned back comfortably, folding his expensive suit jacket over the back of his chair. He looked completely relaxed, almost amused. Go ahead, Evelyn, he said with a faint smile. You always said you wanted peace. Now you can finally have it. His voice sounded gentle enough for strangers to mistake it as kindness. I knew better. Every word carried the quiet satisfaction of someone convinced he had already won. Margaret let out a soft laugh before adding her own opinion, just loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Some women should know when they've been lucky, she said. My son gave you a life most people only dream about. You should be grateful he's still willing to let you leave with something. I slowly turned my head toward her. Years earlier, her words would have cut deeply. That morning, they barely reached me. I'm grateful for many things, I replied evenly. Just not for the reasons you think. She rolled her eyes, still acting mysterious. Logan chuckled quietly. Mom, don't waste your energy. She'll figure out soon enough what life looks like without this family. Without this family. Those 4 words echoed inside my mind. For years, they repeated the same story until they eventually believed it themselves, that everything good in my life came from the Whitmore name. They never asked how the mortgage was quietly paid during Logan's failed business venture. They never questioned why every unexpected financial emergency somehow resolved itself before it became public. They accepted every comfortable vacation, every luxury purchase, every investment, every opportunity, as proof that Logan had built a perfect life with his own hands. I never corrected them. Love doesn't keep score. At least, it isn't supposed to. My attorney, Victor Langford, leaned slightly toward me. Are you certain you're comfortable signing exactly as written? He asked softly enough that only I could hear. There is still time to challenge several provisions. I smiled politely. No changes. He studied my face for a moment, searching for hesitation. He didn't find any. Unlike everyone else in the room, Victor knew the complete picture. He understood why I had insisted on accepting almost nothing in the settlement. He also understood that appearances can become very expensive when people mistake borrowed success for ownership. Logan watched the exchange with obvious confidence. Smart decision, he said. Dragging this out would only make things harder on yourself. Maybe, I answered. Or maybe some endings don't need to be complicated. Margaret folded her arms. At least she's finally being realistic. She glanced toward my attorney with open contempt. Tell your client she's making the best decision she'll ever make. Starting over at her age isn't exactly easy. Victor looked as though he wanted to respond, but I gave him a nearly invisible shake of my head. There was no point. Some people only recognize the truth after it arrives carrying consequences. The judge adjusted his glasses and nodded toward the documents. Mrs. Brooks? I picked up the pen. My wedding ring had already been removed weeks earlier, leaving a faint line across my finger where 10 years of promises used to rest. For a brief second, I closed my eyes. Not because I doubted my decision, but because I wanted to say goodbye to the woman I used to be, the woman who believed loyalty alone could save a marriage. Then I signed my name. One page, then another, then the final signature that officially ended everything. Logan signed immediately afterward, almost carelessly. He pushed the papers back toward the judge before smiling at me across the table. I hope you find whatever you're looking for. I met his eyes calmly. I already have. He laughed quietly, assuming I meant freedom. He had no idea I meant something entirely different. As we stood to leave, Margaret walked past me and paused just long enough to whisper, "You should have taken the support payments. Pride doesn't pay bills." I looked directly at her. Neither does arrogance. Her smile disappeared for the first time that morning. It lasted only a second before she dismissed me with another shake of her head. Outside the courthouse, television crews were interviewing attorneys from unrelated cases, while photographers waited near the front steps. Logan immediately slipped on a pair of designer sunglasses, wrapped one arm around Vanessa Reed, the woman he had introduced to everyone as the love of his new life, and smiled for a few photographs. She rested one hand protectively over her pregnant stomach while reporters congratulated the happy couple. They looked like the perfect fresh start: a successful businessman, a beautiful younger partner, a baby on the way. Exactly the image Logan wanted the world to believe. I watched them from the courthouse entrance without feeling the anger everyone expected to see. One reporter noticed me standing alone and quietly asked, "Mrs. Brooks, do you have any comment about today's settlement?" I smiled politely. "Only one." The cameras turned toward me. Logan glanced back, clearly expecting tears, accusations, or one last emotional outburst. Instead, I simply said, "Sometimes the easiest way to lose something is to convince yourself it already belongs to you." Nobody understood what I meant. Logan laughed, kissed Vanessa on the forehead, and walked confidently toward the black Range Rover waiting beside the curb. His mother followed close behind, still smiling as though the day couldn't possibly become any better. I watched them disappear into the traffic before turning to Victor. He looked at me with the expression of a man waiting for permission. "Are you ready?" he asked. I looked once more at the courthouse where 10 years of my life had officially come to an end. Then I nodded. Yes. My voice remained steady. It's time they discover the difference between owning something and simply being allowed to use it. Victor and I had barely reached the bottom of the courthouse steps when Logan's Range Rover stopped at the curb. Vanessa climbed into the passenger seat first, carefully arranging her dress around her pregnant stomach while Margaret stood beside the open rear door, still complaining about the heat. Logan pressed the unlock button twice and glanced in my direction with a satisfied smile. He wanted me to see him leaving in comfort while I supposedly began my new life with nothing. "Evelyn," he called across the pavement, holding up the key fob. "I hope you kept enough cash for a taxi." Vanessa covered a laugh with one hand. Margaret didn't bother hiding hers. "Let her walk," she said. "A little reality might finally humble her." Victor looked toward me, but I remained still. For 10 years, I had watched those people mistake patience for weakness. I had protected their pride, preserved their public image, and quietly solved problems they never even knew existed. That chapter was over. I opened my handbag and removed a single white envelope sealed with the insignia of Brooks Heritage Investments. "Logan," I said, "before you leave, you should read this." He stared at the envelope as though I had offered him a grocery receipt. "What is it now?" "Something your attorney should have explained before you signed the settlement." His smile tightened. He crossed the pavement, took the envelope from my hand, and tore it open impatiently. Margaret moved closer, peering over his shoulder. Vanessa remained beside the SUV, watching with growing curiosity. Logan unfolded the document and scanned the first page. "Notice of asset recovery," he read aloud. Then he laughed. "This is ridiculous." He looked at Victor. Did she pay you to invent this? Victor's expression never changed. The document is authentic. Logan looked back at me. Asset recovery for what? I nodded toward the vehicle behind him. The Range Rover. His laughter stopped. My car? No, I answered calmly. My company's vehicle. Margaret gave an irritated sigh. Do not start playing games, Evelyn. That SUV was purchased for my son. It was assigned to your son, I corrected. There is a difference. Logan shook his head as though he were speaking to someone confused. I have driven that car for 3 years. The registration is in my household file. The registration lists Brooks Heritage Investments as the legal owner. Your name appears only as the authorized driver. He glanced down at the document again, reading more carefully now. The confidence in his face began to weaken. I continued before he could interrupt. 3 years ago, your employer rejected your request for an executive vehicle allowance because your division failed to meet its performance targets. You came home furious. You said arriving at the country club in your old sedan made you look unsuccessful. Logan's jaw tightened. He remembered. I purchased the Range Rover through one of my corporate entities and leased it to you for $1 a month. I told you it was a private financing arrangement because I knew the truth would humiliate you. Vanessa slowly stepped away from the passenger door. Logan, is that true? No, he snapped. She is twisting something. I looked directly at him. Then show her the title. He said nothing. Margaret's eyes narrowed. What exactly is Brooks Heritage Investments? A private investment and property group headquartered in Louisiana, and what does that have to do with you? She demanded. I control it. The words were simple, but they changed the air around us. Even the noise from the courthouse traffic seemed to fade. Margaret studied my plain linen suit as though wealth had to announce itself through fabric. You? She said finally. You have spent 10 years pretending to be a stay-at-home mother. I was a stay-at-home mother. I paused. I was also chairwoman of a company my family spent 4 generations building. Logan folded the document too quickly, nearly tearing it. If you had money, I would have known. You knew exactly as much as you wanted to know. His face darkened. What is that supposed to mean? It means you never asked where the emergency funds came from when your investments failed. You never questioned why our bills were always paid before your bonus arrived. You never opened the statements I placed in front of you because you preferred believing your salary supported everything. Margaret raised one hand sharply. My son has always provided for his family. His income paid for his suits, club memberships, and the apartment he rented for Vanessa. Vanessa's expression changed. Logan turned toward her immediately. Don't listen to this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The house, the children's tuition, the vacations, the household staff, and every major asset connected to our marriage were paid through companies I control. I stayed quiet because I loved you, Logan. I thought protecting your confidence would help you become the man you kept pretending to be. His eyes hardened with humiliation. You lied to me. I protected you. You let me believe I was taking care of you. I allowed you to believe what your ego required. For the first time, the arrogance in his posture cracked. Beneath the tailored suit and expensive watch, I saw the frightened man he had spent years hiding. Margaret stepped between us. This changes nothing. The divorce is final. You signed away every claim to Whitmore property. I know. I looked at her steadily. That is why I signed so quickly. She frowned. What are you talking about? I didn't want Whitmore property. I wanted legal separation from people who had confused access with ownership. Logan stared at me, then glanced back at the SUV. You're not taking the car. The recovery order is already active. Victor checked his watch. The transport team will arrive in approximately 4 minutes. Logan stepped closer until only a few feet separated us. You planned this. I prepared for it. You wanted to humiliate me. No. I wanted my property returned. His voice lowered. Evelyn, don't do this here. The sudden change in tone almost surprised me. Only minutes earlier, he had joked about me taking a taxi. Now he was looking toward the courthouse entrance, terrified that someone important might witness what happened next. Then place the keys in my hand, I said, quietly. Margaret grabbed his arm. Do not give her anything. Call the police. Victor held up his phone. The police have already been notified that the vehicle may be unlawfully retained after the lease termination. If Mr. Whitmore attempts to drive it away, the company will file a theft report. Logan looked at him, then at me. His breathing grew heavier. You would have me arrested? I would protect an asset that belongs to my company. Vanessa remained near the car, no longer smiling. Logan, just give her the keys. We can get another one. He turned on her so quickly that she stepped backward. Stay out of this. Her face flushed. For one brief second, the perfect new couple disappeared, replaced by two frightened people realizing their future had been built on assumptions. A black transport truck turned onto the courthouse driveway. The recovery company's logo was printed clearly across the side. Logan watched it approach, and whatever resistance remained inside him quietly collapsed. He pulled the key fob from his pocket and held it tightly in his fist. You think this makes you powerful? He asked. No, I replied. Knowing who I am makes me powerful. Taking back one vehicle is simply paperwork. His hand trembled as he placed the keys in my palm. Margaret looked genuinely ill. How much money do you have? She asked. I slipped the keys into my handbag. Enough that you should have been kinder when you believed I had none. The transport crew approached with the recovery documents. Logan signed nothing. He simply stood there while they inspected the vehicle, photographed it, and prepared to load it onto the truck. People leaving the courthouse began to notice. A few slowed down. One man recognized Logan from a charity board and offered an awkward nod. Logan looked away. The shame on his face wasn't caused by losing the car. It came from losing control of the story he had told about himself. Victor opened the rear door of the Maybach, waiting a short distance away. Inside, my children waved through the tinted glass. Margaret stared at the car, then at the driver, then back at me. Where are you going? She asked. Home. You don't have a home here anymore. You're right. I walked toward my children without looking back. That's why we're going to Louisiana. Logan called my name just before I reached the car. When I turned, the anger in his face had been replaced by something far more revealing. Fear. What else belongs to you? He asked. I held his gaze for a moment. More than you ever bothered to understand. Then I stepped into the Maybach and closed the door. As we pulled away, my daughter leaned against me and asked whether everything was finally over. I kissed the top of her head. The marriage is over, I said softly. Through the rear window, I watched Logan standing beside the empty curb while the Range Rover was lifted onto the transport truck. But the truth is only beginning. The private jet landed in New Orleans just before sunset. As the cabin door opened, warm Louisiana air drifted inside, carrying a familiar scent of magnolia and rain-soaked earth. My children rushed toward the windows, amazed by the quiet private terminal waiting below. To them, it felt like the beginning of an adventure. To me, it felt like finally coming home. Mom, my son asked as we walked across the tarmac, are we staying here forever? I smiled and squeezed his shoulder. We're staying somewhere no one can take away from us. He didn't ask another question. Children don't always need long explanations. Sometimes they simply need to hear certainty in their parents' voice. A black sedan waited beside the terminal. Victor Langford loaded our luggage while I helped my daughter settle into the back seat. As we drove through the oak-lined roads leading toward our family estate, neither child mentioned Logan once. That silence told me everything I needed to know. They had spent months pretending not to notice the arguments, the late-night phone calls, and the growing distance between their parents. Children often understand far more than adults realize. By the time we reached home, they were already racing through the front garden, laughing as though the weight they had carried for so long had finally disappeared. I stood quietly on the front porch, listening to their voices echo across the property. For the first time in years, peace didn't feel like something I had to fight for. It simply existed. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Atlanta, Logan was convinced life had never looked brighter. Losing the Range Rover had bruised his pride, but he quickly convinced himself it meant very little. "It's just a car," he told Vanessa as they drove to the medical center in a rental SUV. "I'll replace it before the end of the month." Vanessa forced a smile. "Exactly. We have much bigger things to celebrate today." Sitting in the back seat, Margaret nodded in agreement. Forget about Evelyn. She wanted one last dramatic scene before disappearing. Let her have it. Logan looked at Vanessa's growing baby bump and gently rested his hand on it. "Today is what matters," he said. "By tonight, we'll know whether we're having a son." Margaret smiled proudly. A grandson. Finally, someone to carry the Whitmore name the right way. No one noticed how uncomfortable Vanessa suddenly became. She turned toward the window, avoiding everyone's eyes. Logan assumed she was simply nervous about the appointment. He had no reason to think otherwise. The medical center greeted them like honored guests. Nurses escorted the family directly into a private waiting lounge reserved for VIP patients. Margaret happily accepted coffee while talking about decorating the nursery. She had already picked out furniture, chosen paint colors, and even ordered a custom silver bracelet engraved with the Whitmore family crest. "I've waited years for this," she said proudly. "This baby will finally give our family a future worth celebrating." Logan laughed. "Mom, don't scare the kid before he's even born." They all laughed together. Everyone except Vanessa. She quietly held a bottle of water with both hands, barely touching it. Rachel Whitmore, Logan's younger sister, finally noticed. "You okay?" she asked. Vanessa nodded too quickly. "Just nervous." "Every first-time mother feels that way," Margaret assured her. "Once you hear the heartbeat again, all those worries disappear." Vanessa smiled politely, but something about it felt forced. She kept glancing toward her phone, checking the screen every few minutes before slipping it back into her purse. Logan noticed but thought little of it. He assumed she was messaging friends or reading pregnancy updates. After all, he trusted her completely. Why wouldn't he? A nurse soon appeared and invited the family to follow her into one of the clinic's luxury ultrasound suites. Logan wrapped an arm around Vanessa as they walked down the hallway. "Ready?" he whispered. She hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before nodding. "Yeah." It was such a tiny pause that no one else seemed to notice. Inside the examination room, the lights were dimmed while the ultrasound equipment hummed quietly in the corner. "Doctor." Emily Carter entered carrying a digital tablet and greeted everyone warmly. "Good afternoon. Congratulations to all of you." Margaret beamed with pride. "We're hoping you'll tell us we're having a grandson today." "Doctor." Carter smiled professionally. "We'll know very soon." She reviewed Vanessa's chart, asked a few routine questions, and prepared the examination. The atmosphere remained cheerful. Logan reached for Vanessa's hand, believing this would become one of the happiest memories of his life. Across the room, Margaret quietly wiped away a tear before anyone noticed. She truly believed every hardship the family had faced over the past year had led them to this moment. Outside the clinic, Atlanta continued moving as though nothing extraordinary was about to happen. Cars filled the streets. People hurried between meetings. Somewhere across the city, lawyers closed files from another ordinary day in court. No one could have imagined that inside one examination room, a routine prenatal visit was only minutes away from exposing a truth capable of tearing an entire family apart. As Dr. Carter switched on the ultrasound monitor, she smiled gently at Vanessa. "Let's meet your baby." None of them realized those would be the last peaceful words spoken in that room. "Doctor." Emily Carter dimmed the lights before turning the ultrasound monitor toward Vanessa. The room immediately grew quiet. Logan stood beside the examination table with one hand wrapped around Vanessa's fingers, while Margaret remained only a few steps away, smiling with the excitement of someone already imagining birthday parties, family holidays, and the future of the Whitmore name. Rachel pulled out her phone, hoping to capture the moment they first saw the baby on the screen. "Ready?" "Doctor," Carter asked warmly. Logan nodded without taking his eyes off Vanessa. "We've been waiting for this day for months." A few seconds later, the monitor came to life. Soft shades of gray slowly formed the outline of a tiny body. Then the steady rhythm of a heartbeat filled the room. Logan smiled wider than he had in years. Vanessa closed her eyes as tears quietly rolled down her cheeks. Margaret pressed both hands together. "Listen to that," she whispered. "That's the sound of a new beginning." "Doctor." Carter carefully adjusted the imaging probe, studying the screen with practiced attention. "Your baby looks healthy," she said. "Growth measurements are right where I expect them to be." Relief swept across the room. Logan leaned closer to the monitor, unable to hide his excitement. "Can you tell yet?" he asked. "Doctor." Carter smiled. "Yes." She paused just long enough to let the anticipation build. "Congratulations. You're expecting a little boy." Margaret covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. "I knew it," she laughed. "I told everyone it would be a grandson." Logan wrapped both arms around Vanessa without thinking. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "We're having a son." Vanessa forced a smile and nodded, but there was something fragile behind her eyes that no one else seemed to notice. Rachel hugged her mother while Margaret was already talking about family traditions, heirlooms, and passing the Whitmore name to another generation. For several wonderful minutes, the room was filled with nothing except laughter, congratulations, and plans for the future. It was exactly the memory every growing family hopes to create. Then something changed. Dr. Carter stopped speaking. Her smile faded almost imperceptibly as she looked back at the monitor. She adjusted the image once. Then again, her attention shifted from the ultrasound to the digital medical file displayed on the tablet beside her. Logan noticed the silence first. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Doctor." Carter didn't answer immediately. Instead, she enlarged several measurements before quietly comparing them with the laboratory reports attached to Vanessa's prenatal records. Her expression remained professional, but the cheerful warmth from only moments earlier had disappeared. Margaret stepped forward. "Doctor, is something wrong with the baby?" "Doctor." Carter looked up and offered a reassuring smile. "The baby appears healthy." The answer should have relieved everyone, yet it somehow made the room even quieter. Logan frowned. "Then why do you look concerned?" She rested the ultrasound probe on the tray before speaking. "I just need to verify one small detail in the laboratory results." Logan relaxed slightly. "That's all?" "Most likely." Dr. Carter picked up the tablet again. "Our clinic routinely performs advanced prenatal genetic screening for every patient. One of the reports includes information I'd like to review before we finish today's visit." Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Modern medicine always finds something to double-check." She laughed softly. "I'm sure it's nothing." Dr. Carter didn't respond. She continued reading through several pages, occasionally comparing one report against another. Vanessa's breathing gradually became faster. She tried to remain calm, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the examination table until her knuckles turned pale. Logan noticed immediately. "Hey," he said gently, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Don't worry. The doctor literally said our son is healthy." Vanessa nodded without meeting his eyes. "I know. Then what are you afraid of?" She opened her mouth to answer but stopped herself. "Nothing," she whispered. Across the room, Rachel quietly exchanged a puzzled glance with her mother. Even Margaret, who had been celebrating only moments earlier, now watched the doctor with growing uncertainty. Dr. Carter finally set the tablet down and folded her hands together. "Mr. Whitmore," she said calmly, "I'd like to ask you a routine question before we conclude today's appointment." Logan smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Sure. Ask me anything. Have you ever undergone a reproductive procedure or fertility-related surgery that might not appear in the records your primary physician forwarded to us?" Logan blinked in confusion. "No, not that I can remember." "Doctor." Carter nodded politely, but instead of closing the file, she opened another section and carefully reviewed several older medical entries that had just synchronized from the regional hospital network. Her eyes paused on one particular document. She read it once. Then she read it again. This time, the silence inside the room felt completely different. It wasn't the peaceful silence of two parents waiting to meet their child. It was the uneasy silence that settles over a room just before someone's life changes forever. Doctor. Carter slowly looked up from the screen. Mr. Whitmore, she said with measured professionalism. Before anyone leaves today, I need to confirm something that appears in your medical history. Logan's smile disappeared. For reasons he couldn't explain, a quiet sense of dread settled into his chest. He had walked into the clinic expecting to learn the name of his future son. Instead, he was about to hear a question that would force every person in that room to question everything they believed only minutes earlier. For several long seconds, no one said a word. The only sound left in the room was the gentle rhythm of the baby's heartbeat still echoing from the ultrasound machine. Just moments earlier, everyone had been talking about baby names, family traditions, and the future. Now every pair of eyes rested on Dr. Emily Carter. Logan forced a small smile, trying to break the growing tension. Doctor, you're starting to worry us. Doctor. Carter remained composed. That isn't my intention, Mr. Whitmore. Before we finish today's appointment, I need to verify one detail in your medical history. Logan shrugged. Go ahead. She turned the tablet toward herself once more. Several minutes ago, our system synchronized older records from your previous healthcare provider. One report requires clarification. Margaret folded her arms impatiently. If this has nothing to do with the baby, can it wait? Dr. Carter shook her head politely. I'm afraid it cannot. The room became silent again. Logan tried to laugh. Well, ask whatever you need. Dr. Carter looked directly at him. Mr. Whitmore, approximately 5 years ago, did you undergo a vasectomy? The smile disappeared from Logan's face almost instantly. A what? A vasectomy. He frowned, clearly confused. I honestly don't remember. Margaret looked at him in disbelief. How could you not remember something like that? Logan rubbed the back of his neck as scattered memories slowly returned. It was years ago, after our second child was born. His voice became quieter. Evelyn and I agreed our family was complete. My doctor recommended the procedure because it was safer than surgery for her. Dr. Carter nodded slowly. That matches the records. Logan still looked unconcerned. But why are we talking about something that happened years ago? Instead of answering immediately, Doctor, Carter opened another page containing the surgical report and the follow-up examinations performed months later. According to these documents, the procedure was successful. She paused before continuing. 2 separate laboratory tests confirmed complete sterility. The room froze. Logan blinked several times as though he hadn't heard correctly. There must be a mistake. Doctor. Carter calmly slid the tablet toward him. Please verify your personal information. Logan stared at the screen. His full name, his date of birth, his medical identification number, every detail was correct. His breathing became noticeably heavier. No, he whispered. This doesn't make sense. Margaret immediately stepped forward. Doctor, are you telling us these records are wrong? I'm saying these records are consistent with every document available in the regional medical system. Logan shook his head. Medicine isn't perfect. People make mistakes. Doctor, Carter remained remarkably calm. That can happen. Which is why I reviewed every record twice before speaking. She looked at him with genuine compassion. Mr. Whitmore, based on these reports, natural conception would have been extraordinarily unlikely. Logan slowly turned toward Vanessa. His eyes searched hers for reassurance, but she immediately looked away. A chill seemed to spread through the room. Rachel noticed it first. Vanessa, she said softly, why won't you look at him? Vanessa remained silent. Logan took one careful step closer. Say something. She still couldn't raise her eyes. Logan's voice became unsteady. Tell me the doctor is wrong. Tears rolled down Vanessa's cheeks, but she couldn't force out a single word. That silence hurt far more than any confession could have. Margaret looked from Vanessa to Dr. Carter, then back to her son. No, she whispered repeatedly. No, this can't be happening. Dr. Carter gently folded her hands together. I understand how difficult this is. If there are any questions about paternity, modern DNA testing can provide definitive answers after the child's birth. Logan barely heard the last sentence. His attention remained fixed on Vanessa. Look at me, he pleaded quietly. Slowly, she lifted her head. The guilt in her eyes answered the question she still hadn't spoken aloud. Logan felt the strength leave his legs. He reached for the back of a chair to steady himself. Everything he had imagined over the past several months, his new beginning, his future marriage, the son he had proudly celebrated only minutes earlier suddenly felt like smoke disappearing into thin air. He whispered one final question, almost too quietly for anyone to hear. If he's not my son. His voice broke beneath the weight of the words. Whose child is he? Vanessa closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her face. She drew one trembling breath, knowing that whatever she said next would destroy far more than a relationship. It would tear apart an entire family. Vanessa covered her face as tears slipped through her trembling fingers. No one spoke. No one rushed to comfort her. The truth had already entered the room, and there wasn't a single person there who could force it back out again. Logan remained frozen, staring at the woman he had planned to marry only weeks after finalizing our divorce. His lips parted, but no words came. Everything he had believed about his future was collapsing too quickly for his mind to keep up. Finally, Vanessa lowered her hands. Her voice was barely audible. I'm sorry. Logan shook his head slowly. No. His eyes never left hers. Don't start with an apology. He took another step forward. Answer my question. She swallowed hard, struggling to breathe through the tears. Please. Whose child is it? His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was wounded. That frightened everyone in the room far more than shouting ever could. Vanessa closed her eyes. I wanted to tell you. Logan let out a bitter laugh. When? She couldn't answer. After the wedding? He asked. After the baby was born? Still nothing. Margaret stepped between them, refusing to believe what was unfolding. Tell my son the doctor is wrong. Vanessa slowly shook her head. Margaret's face turned pale. No. Rachel looked from Vanessa to her mother, completely confused. Mom, somebody has to explain what's happening. Before anyone else could speak, Vanessa whispered, it wasn't supposed to become serious. Logan stared at her. What wasn't? She wiped away another tear. The affair. The room seemed to stop breathing. Logan didn't react immediately. He simply stood there, trying to understand the sentence he had just heard. Affair? He repeated quietly. Vanessa nodded. It happened a few times. With who? She looked toward the floor again. Logan followed her eyes. Every person in the room instinctively turned in the same direction. Standing near the doorway was Michael Dawson, Rachel's husband, who had arrived only minutes earlier after rushing over from work to join the family celebration. He had walked in just in time to hear the last few sentences. The color drained from his face as everyone looked at him. Rachel frowned. Michael? She asked, forcing a nervous smile. Why are they looking at you? He couldn't answer. Logan slowly turned toward him. Say something. Michael remained motionless. His silence lasted only a few seconds, but it felt endless. Rachel stepped closer to her husband. Michael, tell them they're wrong. He lowered his head. That single movement shattered the last hope anyone in the room was still holding on to. Rachel stumbled backward as though someone had struck her. No, she whispered. Please don't do this. Logan walked toward Michael until they stood only inches apart. How long? Michael's voice cracked. About 7 months. Logan stared at him without blinking. 7 months. Michael nodded once. It started after a charity gala. Logan laughed softly, but there was no amusement in the sound. While I was planning a future with Vanessa, he looked directly into Michael's eyes. You were sleeping with her. Michael couldn't defend himself. There's no excuse. No, Logan agreed. There isn't. Rachel burst into tears. You destroyed our marriage. She looked toward Vanessa with complete disbelief. And you destroyed his life too. Vanessa covered her mouth as sobs overwhelmed her. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Logan turned toward her. The moment you decided to lie, someone was always going to get hurt. Those words echoed through the room. Even Margaret had nothing left to say. For the first time since I had known her, certainty abandoned her completely. She looked at the family she had spent years trying to protect and realized every dream she had been celebrating only minutes earlier had already fallen apart. Logan slowly removed the engagement ring from his pocket. He had planned to surprise Vanessa with it after the appointment, believing that hearing his son's heartbeat would make the proposal unforgettable. He stared at the small diamond resting in his palm for several seconds before placing it quietly on the examination table. "I bought this yesterday," he said without looking at anyone. "I thought today would be the happiest day of my life." No one answered. There was nothing left that could lessen the weight of those words. Logan slipped both hands into his pockets and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped beside Michael. "You didn't just betray me," he said. "You betrayed every person who ever trusted you." Michael closed his eyes but never argued. Logan continued walking until the door closed behind him. The sound echoed through the hallway. It wasn't the end of his pain. It was only the end of the life he believed he was living. As he reached the parking lot, his phone began vibrating repeatedly inside his jacket. One notification after another appeared across the screen. The first came from his bank. The second came from his financial advisor. The third carried a subject line that made him stop walking altogether. "Urgent. Immediate changes to your authorized accounts." Logan stared at the screen, unaware that everything he had lost inside the clinic was only the beginning. Within the next hour, he would discover that betrayal wasn't the only thing waiting for him that day. Logan sat alone in his SUV for nearly 20 minutes without starting the engine. The parking lot outside the medical center buzzed with ordinary life cars pulling in, families walking through the entrance, nurses ending their shifts, but inside his vehicle, time felt completely frozen. His hands rested on the steering wheel, yet he couldn't remember driving out of the garage. The image of Vanessa standing in tears and Michael lowering his head replayed over and over until every memory blended into one unbearable truth. He had spent months believing someone else had betrayed him first. He never imagined the people closest to him would betray him next. His phone vibrated again. Then again. He ignored the first few notifications, assuming they were more calls from his mother or messages from relatives who had already heard the news. Eventually, the screen lit up with a call from his longtime financial advisor, Benjamin Foster. Logan almost declined it before finally answering. "Logan, where are you?" Benjamin asked immediately. "Does it matter?" Logan replied wearily. "It does." Benjamin's voice sounded unusually tense. "You need to check your banking apps right now." Logan frowned. "Why?" "Because something happened within the last hour." Logan opened the banking application with one hand while holding the phone with the other. Instead of his account balance, a security notice filled the screen. "Your access has been restricted. Please contact the primary account administrator for assistance." He refreshed the page. The same message appeared. He opened a second account. Exactly the same result. A third. No access. Logan's heartbeat quickened. "Benjamin, what am I looking at?" "That's what I've been trying to figure out," Benjamin answered. "Every executive account connected to your profile has been frozen." Logan straightened in his seat. "Frozen?" "Not exactly." Benjamin hesitated before continuing. "Your authorization has been removed." Logan stared at the screen in disbelief. "That doesn't make any sense." "Those are my accounts." "Are you sure?" The question irritated him immediately. "Of course I'm sure." Benjamin remained silent for a second. "Logan, when I contacted the bank, they told me your name is listed only as an authorized user. The ownership belongs to another entity." Logan felt the blood drain from his face. "Who?" Benjamin exhaled slowly. "They wouldn't tell me over the phone." Logan ended the call without another word and immediately dialed the bank himself. After confirming his identity, the representative politely explained the situation. "Mr. Whitmore, your profile no longer has authorization to access these accounts." Logan fought to keep his voice steady. "Who removed my authorization?" "The primary account holder submitted updated instructions earlier today." "Then tell me who the account holder is." Another brief pause. I'm sorry, sir. For privacy reasons, I can't disclose additional client information. Logan slammed his hand against the steering wheel. Those accounts paid my mortgage. Sir, the accounts were never registered under your ownership. They paid my bills. They paid bills you were authorized to manage. The difference between those two sentences hit him harder than he expected. For years, he had assumed the accounts belonged to him because he used them every day. He had never once asked whose signature approved the spending limits, why transfers appeared without delay, or why every financial request was processed almost instantly. He simply accepted the lifestyle as proof that he deserved it. The call ended, leaving him staring at his reflection in the dark phone screen. He suddenly remembered dozens of small moments he had ignored over the years. Documents Evelyn signed without discussion. Financial meetings she attended alone. Emails she politely said were family business. At the time, none of it had seemed important. Now those memories refused to leave him. His thoughts were interrupted by another notification. This one came from the company that managed his premium credit cards. Your executive spending privileges have been discontinued effective immediately. Logan laughed bitterly under his breath. What else? He muttered. Almost on cue, another message arrived. His corporate fuel card had been deactivated. His airport lounge membership had been canceled. Even his reserved parking privileges at headquarters had been revoked. One by one, the conveniences he had treated as permanent quietly disappeared from his life. None of them had been taken by force. They had simply ended. Across the country, I was sitting on the back porch watching my children feed ducks along the edge of the lake. Their laughter carried across the water while the evening sun settled behind the trees. Victor stepped outside, carrying 2 cups of coffee before taking the chair beside me. Everything is moving exactly as scheduled, he said. I accepted the cup without asking for details. Has he figured it out yet? Victor shook his head. Not completely. He still believes this is about money. I watched my daughter throw another handful of birdseed into the water. But it isn't. Victor nodded. No. After a brief pause, he added, the financial restrictions were only the first step. I looked toward the calm surface of the lake, thinking about the man I had once believed would grow old beside me. I never wanted Logan to lose everything. I only wanted him to experience one simple truth. Respect cannot survive where gratitude no longer exists. Before Victor could say anything else, my phone vibrated once. A new message had arrived from our legal team. I read it quietly before locking the screen again. Victor noticed the faint smile that crossed my face. Good news? He asked. I stood up and looked toward the sunset. Tomorrow, I answered softly, he finds out who has really been keeping the Whitmore family standing all these years. The next morning, Logan barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Vanessa lowering her head, Michael refusing to meet his gaze, and the unanswered questions that had begun swallowing every certainty he once had. By sunrise, only one thought remained. If someone had stripped away his financial access overnight, there had to be an explanation, and he intended to find it. At exactly 9 o'clock, Logan walked through the revolving doors of Vanguard Financial Group, the investment firm that had managed the Whitmore family's wealth for decades. He had visited the building countless times before. Receptionists knew his name. Advisors greeted him with respect. Employees stood whenever he entered the executive floor. It had always felt like walking into a place where he belonged. This morning felt different. Conversations stopped as he approached the front desk. The receptionist offered a polite smile, but it lacked the warmth he remembered. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. I need to speak with Daniel Hayes immediately. Do you have an appointment? Logan frowned. Since when do I need an appointment? The young woman hesitated before answering. Mr. Hayes is currently in a board meeting. Logan placed both hands on the counter. Tell him it's urgent. A few minutes later, Daniel Hayes, the firm's chief financial officer, stepped into the lobby carrying a folder. He had worked with the Whitmore family for years and had always treated Logan with professional respect. Today, however, there was something noticeably heavier in his expression. Logan, Daniel said quietly, let's use one of the conference rooms. The room they entered overlooked downtown Atlanta. Logan remained standing while Daniel closed the door behind them. "I don't need coffee," Logan said immediately. "I need answers." Daniel nodded. "I assumed that was why you came." Logan threw several printed bank statements onto the table. "Every account I use has been locked. Every corporate card has been canceled. Nobody will tell me who's responsible." Daniel studied the papers without touching them, because the banks aren't allowed to. Logan's patience snapped. "Then you tell me." Daniel took a slow breath before opening the folder he had brought with him. Inside were documents Logan had never seen before. "Before I answer your questions," Daniel said, "there's something you need to understand about the Whitmore family's financial history." Logan folded his arms. "I've lived that history." Daniel looked at him with genuine sympathy. "Only part of it." The room fell silent. Daniel slid the first document across the table. 5 years ago, Whitmore Development Group was less than 30 days away from bankruptcy. Logan stared at him. "That's impossible." "It isn't." Daniel placed several audited financial reports beside the first document. The company had accumulated more than $80 million in debt after a series of failed commercial projects. Creditors were preparing legal action. Multiple banks refused additional financing. Logan picked up one report after another, scanning the numbers with growing disbelief. Every page carried official audit stamps and signatures. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked. Daniel answered honestly. "Because by the time you became involved in senior management, the crisis had already been resolved." Logan looked up sharply. "Resolved by who?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a final agreement on the table. The signature identifying the investor had been legally redacted. Only one description remained visible: Private Family Investment Trust. "A private investor purchased the controlling debt," Daniel explained. "Every major creditor was paid. The restructuring agreement saved the company within 48 hours. Logan struggled to process what he was reading. "Then my family never rebuilt the company?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "The company survived because someone else decided it deserved another chance." Logan lowered himself into the chair across the table. It felt as though the room had become smaller. "My mother always said my father rebuilt everything after the recession." Daniel looked down briefly before meeting Logan's eyes again. "Your father worked incredibly hard. No one disputes that. But hard work alone couldn't erase $80 million in debt." Logan's grip tightened around the papers. "Who was the investor?" Daniel remained silent. "Daniel." Logan's voice became firmer. "Who?" "I'm legally bound by a confidentiality agreement." Logan stood again, frustration returning. "My entire family has trusted this firm for decades." "Yes. Then stop speaking like a lawyer and tell me the truth." Daniel walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. "For years," he said quietly, "you believed you were building an empire." He turned back toward Logan. "In reality, someone else had been holding the foundation together long before you realized the building was collapsing." Logan felt an unfamiliar knot form in his stomach. Pieces of the previous day began fitting together in ways he hadn't considered before. The accounts, the vehicle, the effortless financial approvals. Evelyn's final words outside the courthouse. "You were only being allowed to use it." He looked back at Daniel. "Does this have something to do with Evelyn?" Daniel didn't answer. His silence said enough. Logan's breathing slowed as another realization surfaced. For the first time since the divorce, he wasn't thinking about the house, the money, or the company. He was thinking about his marriage. About every evening Evelyn quietly handled paperwork he never bothered to read. About every financial decision he dismissed because he assumed it wasn't important. About every time he thanked himself for a success that may never have belonged to him. Daniel finally broke the silence. "There is one document you're legally entitled to receive." He removed a sealed envelope from the folder and placed it gently on the table. Across the front, in elegant handwriting, were 6 simple words: "To be opened after the divorce." Logan recognized the handwriting instantly. It belonged to Evelyn. His fingers hovered above the envelope, but he couldn't bring himself to touch it. Somehow, He already knew that whatever waited inside would change everything he believed about the last 10 years of his life. Logan stared at the envelope for what felt like an eternity. His name was written in Evelyn's unmistakable handwriting, the same elegant script that had once appeared on birthday cards, anniversary letters, and little notes she used to leave inside his briefcase before important meetings. Back then, he rarely stopped long enough to appreciate them. Now, one simple envelope carried more weight than every legal document he had read over the past 2 days. Daniel quietly stood and walked toward the window, giving Logan the privacy to open it. No one spoke. No one rushed him. Some truths demand silence before they can be understood. Logan finally broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. There was only a single page. At the top, in Evelyn's handwriting, were 6 words that immediately tightened his chest. "If you're reading this, it's over," he continued reading. "Logan, if this letter has reached you, it means our marriage is officially over. And for the first time in many years, nothing is being hidden from you anymore. I spent a long time deciding whether I should ever tell you the truth. Not because I wanted to protect my money, but because I wanted to protect the man I believed you could become. Somewhere along the way, I realized I was protecting your pride instead. Those are not the same thing." Logan stopped reading for a moment. He lowered the page, staring blankly at the conference table. Every word felt painfully familiar because, deep down, he knew she was right. Daniel remained silent. He understood this was no longer a financial meeting. It was a husband finally meeting the truth his wife had carried alone for years. Logan looked back at the letter. 5 years ago, when Whitmore Development Group stood on the edge of bankruptcy, your family never knew how close everything came to disappearing. Banks refused new loans. Creditors prepared lawsuits. Employees worried they would lose their jobs. Your father had already exhausted every possible option. I could have watched everything collapse. Instead, I made a different choice." Logan's breathing slowed as he continued reading. "Through my family's investment trust, I purchased the debt, settled every major obligation, and gave the company another chance. Not because the business mattered more than anything else, but because I loved you. I couldn't bear watching the people you loved lose everything they had spent decades building." His hands began to shake. He remembered that year. He remembered celebrating what he believed had been an incredible recovery. He remembered standing at company events giving speeches about resilience, hard work, and determination. He had accepted applause that had never truly belonged to him. The letter continued. "I asked only one thing in return. My involvement would remain completely confidential. Your father agreed because saving the company mattered more to him than protecting his own pride. He thanked me with tears in his eyes and promised that one day, when the time was right, he would tell you everything himself. He never got the chance." Logan closed his eyes. His father had passed away 2 years earlier after a sudden heart attack. Until that moment, he had believed his father carried only business experience to the grave. Now he realized the man had carried an enormous secret as well. Logan continued reading. "After your father passed away, I honored my promise. I continued financing the restructuring, approved every major operating loan, and quietly covered financial gaps whenever new problems appeared. I wasn't trying to make you feel small. I was trying to give you time to become the leader your father believed you could be. But over time, something changed. Success stopped making you grateful. It made you believe you no longer needed the people standing beside you." A painful silence filled the room. Logan remembered every time Evelyn tried to discuss finances, and every occasion he dismissed her with a quick, careless answer. "I'll handle it. Don't worry about business. Leave that to me." Those words now echoed through his mind with unbearable irony. Daniel finally turned back from the window. "Your father loved you very much," he said quietly. "He also respected Evelyn more than anyone I've ever met." Logan looked up. "You knew?" Daniel nodded. "I've known for 5 years." Logan gave a hollow laugh. "Everyone knew. Except me." "Not everyone," Daniel replied. "Only the people legally responsible for protecting the agreement." Logan lowered his eyes again. The final section of Evelyn's letter remained unread. He took a slow breath before continuing. Yesterday wasn't revenge. If I wanted revenge, I could have destroyed everything years ago. Yesterday was simply the day I stopped protecting someone who no longer appreciated being protected. Every decision made after our divorce followed the same contracts and legal agreements that had existed for years. The difference is that I finally allowed them to operate exactly as they were written. Logan felt something break inside him, not anger, not pride, but the last excuse he had been holding on to. For 2 days, he had blamed bad luck, betrayal, lawyers, and timing. Now, for the first time, he understood that none of those things had ended his marriage. His own choices had. He folded the letter carefully instead of crumpling it. "Where is she now?" he asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Exactly where she always wanted to be." "With the children?" Daniel nodded. "Building a peaceful life." Logan looked down at the envelope resting in his hands. For years, he believed success meant owning more, earning more, and proving himself to everyone around him. Evelyn had quietly spent those same years protecting people she loved without asking for recognition. One path had built an image, the other had built a legacy. Daniel reached into the folder one final time and placed a single document beside the letter. "This becomes public tomorrow morning," he said. Logan glanced at the heading. Notice of transfer of controlling ownership. His heartbeat quickened. Daniel met his eyes with quiet sympathy. "When the board meets tomorrow, every remaining question about Whitmore Development Group will finally be answered." Logan slowly closed the folder. He no longer wondered whether Evelyn had been hiding something. He wondered how he had lived beside her for 10 years without ever truly seeing the extraordinary woman she had always been. Tomorrow, the rest of the world would learn the truth. But tonight, Logan had to face something even more difficult. He had to live with the realization that the greatest thing he ever lost wasn't his fortune, his position, or his reputation. It was the only person who had spent years quietly saving him while asking for nothing in return. The following morning, every major business publication carried the same headline: Whitmore Development Group announces new ownership structure. Investors crowded financial websites. Employees gathered in break rooms, refreshing their phones every few seconds. Industry analysts debated what the announcement could possibly mean. No one expected the name they were about to hear. At precisely 9 o'clock, the company's board meeting began. Executives, shareholders, legal advisors, and senior managers filled the conference room. Logan sat quietly near the back, no longer in the front row where he had spent years believing he belonged. He wasn't there to defend himself anymore. He simply wanted to hear the truth from beginning to end. The chairman stood and addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming. Today marks the completion of a transition that actually began 5 years ago." A presentation appeared on the large screen behind him. The first slide summarized the company's financial recovery, debt restructuring, and long-term growth. Then the final slide appeared: majority shareholder, Brooks Heritage Investment Trust. A wave of confusion spread across the room. The chairman continued: "For legal reasons, the identity of the trust's managing partner has remained confidential until today. That agreement has now expired." The room fell completely still. The next photograph appeared on the screen. It was Evelyn. Not in a courtroom, not as Logan's former wife, but standing confidently inside the headquarters of Brooks Heritage, addressing employees during an annual leadership conference. Beneath the photograph were the words, "Evelyn Brooks, founder, managing trustee, and majority owner." A collective gasp echoed across the room. Several executives looked toward Logan in disbelief. Others simply lowered their heads, finally understanding why so many financial decisions over the past 5 years had never made sense. Logan didn't react. He couldn't. Every answer he had spent the last 2 days searching for was now displayed before the entire company. The chairman continued speaking. "Without Brooks Heritage Investment Trust, Whitmore Development Group would have ceased operations 5 years ago. Every major restructuring initiative, every emergency financing agreement, and every strategic recovery plan was approved and funded through Mrs. Brooks and her investment team. No one interrupted. There was nothing left to question. The evidence spoke for itself." The chairman placed both hands on the podium. Mrs. Brooks has informed the board that following the completion of her divorce, she will officially conclude all extraordinary financial support beyond the contractual obligations already in place. Future operations will proceed under the new ownership structure. The announcement was calm, professional, and completely free of personal attacks. That was what made it even more powerful. Evelyn never stood before the board to embarrass Logan. She simply allowed the truth to exist where lies had survived for far too long. Logan lowered his head. He finally understood something that had escaped him throughout his marriage. Evelyn had never wanted him to feel indebted to her. She only wanted to be respected, and he had failed to give her even that. The meeting ended quietly. People left the room in thoughtful silence rather than whispered gossip. A few executives paused beside Logan, placing a hand on his shoulder before walking away. None of them blamed him for the company's past financial struggles. They pitied the man who had spent 10 years living beside an extraordinary woman without ever recognizing her worth until she was gone. Hundreds of miles away, in Louisiana, I wasn't watching the board meeting. I was sitting beneath an old oak tree while my son practiced throwing a baseball, and my daughter laughed every time our dog chased after it instead of the ball. My phone buzzed several times with news alerts and congratulatory messages from business partners. I silenced every notification without reading them. They could wait. My children could not. "Mom," my daughter called, running toward me with grass stains on her knees. "Come play with us." I smiled and stood. "I'm coming." As I walked across the yard, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. Peace doesn't arrive when the person who hurt you finally suffers. Peace arrives when their choices no longer control your happiness. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, I stepped onto the porch overlooking the lake. The sky glowed with the last colors of sunset, and for the first time in a very long while, the silence around me felt complete rather than empty. I thought about Logan. Despite everything that had happened, I no longer wished him failure. I hoped he would someday become the man I once believed he could be, not for me, because that chapter had ended, but for himself, and for the children who still deserved a father capable of learning from his mistakes. Some people mistake kindness for weakness until kindness disappears. Some mistake loyalty for entitlement until loyalty walks away, and some spend years chasing success, only to realize too late that the greatest fortune they ever possessed was the person quietly standing beside them all along. If this story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this: never measure someone's value by how little they say about their sacrifices. The strongest people are often the ones carrying the heaviest burdens without asking for recognition. Respect the hands that help build your life before they're no longer there to hold it together. Thank you for spending this journey with us. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what lesson stayed with you the most. And if you enjoy powerful stories about family, betrayal, justice, redemption, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Shadow Verdict. Until next time, remember this: wealth can be rebuilt, businesses can recover, and reputations can change, but once genuine love and trust are carelessly thrown away, they are rarely given a second chance.